Hi, everyone, and welcome to our pitch for the City Finance Lab. I'm here today with Patrick Berge, also from South Pole, who we're launching this initiative jointly with. And I'm just going to give a really brief introduction before handing it over to him. And the first thing I wanted to do was answer the question, because people have been coming up and asking me, what is Climate Kick? Who are you guys? What are you doing? What exactly is it that you're kicking? And so what we are is a European knowledge and innovation community. That's what KIC stands for in Climate Kick. And we were created by the European Institute for Innovation and Technology. And the community part in our name is really actually very key and very essential, because what we are at our core is a partnership community of over 300 European institutions, ranging from business to academia all the way through the nonprofit sector. And we're aimed at addressing climate change through particularly innovation. So what we're looking at doing is leveraging on this partner community, acting as a convener, acting as a neutral broker to develop and create with them innovative products, services, and solutions to drive a zero carbon economy in Europe. Now, I realize that's a pretty big mandate. So part of what we want to do and how we're doing this, driving the zero carbon economy in Europe, is we're actually looking at unlocking finance for climate action. And more specifically, we're looking at fostering green bankable assets in cities, because we know, if we look at the numbers, the rationale for unlocking climate finance in cities is very clear. Cities really struggle. They face many barriers in terms of creditworthiness, procurement guidelines, and only 15% of climate finance is actually trickling down to our cities. So this initiative, the City Finance Lab, is a really great example of how we've come together through our partner network to create an innovative solution for unlocking city finance. And I'm going to let Patrick get more into the details about how we're going to do that. But I also just wanted to put the call out there that if Climate Kick is an interesting organization for you, if you want to engage more around the City Finance Lab, once you kind of dig deeper into what it is, please come talk to me, talk to Patrick. We have a booth at number 25, and we'd be really, really happy to talk to you a little bit more about it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to South Pole.
Thanks a lot, Skylar. So my name is Patrick. I'm one of the co-founders of South Pole, and I'll be talking a little bit about the City Finance Lab today. I'll try to keep it short so that we have time for Q&A. And the City Finance Lab is essentially about unlocking climate finance for cities. And when I think about climate finance and cities, the best analogy that comes to my mind is like Superman with the kryptonite chain around his neck. Because cities have actually the power and the will to tackle climate change, both adaptation and mitigation, but something is holding them back. And I think one of the essential, let's say, ingredients of kryptonite in this case would be lack of finance. But before I get to that, maybe I'm preaching here to the converted, maybe you are all into cities already, but I just wanted to explain a little bit why cities. So first of all, half of the world's population live in cities today. By 2050, we expect that 3/4 of the world's population will be in cities. So urbanization is a mega trend, especially in Asia and Africa. 80% of the world's GDP is created in cities. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of the world's energy-related emissions happen within cities or because of cities. And when it comes to climate change risks, more from a physical risk perspective, CDP estimates that we will have about $158 trillion in assets at risk by 2050 in cities. So if we think of sea level rise, extreme weather events, cities are obviously the ones that will be most impacted by it. So cities are obviously, when it comes to climate change, a big part of the problem or of the challenge, but they are also part of the solution, right? So if you look at NASCA, this registry by the UN on non-state actors and what they are doing, there are already more than 250 cities that have climate action commitments. So that's quite a big number. I mean, there are many more cities out there that are not engaged in climate action yet. But what we observe is cities are, on average, more progressive and more ambitious than national level governments. And there are many reasons for that, but I think one very obvious reason is that when it comes to benefits of climate action, these are clearer and more tangible at city level. If you reduce traffic, you reduce pollution, you reduce congestion, you make cities more livable, improve quality of life. And I think cities' mayors get that. And at the same time, I think cities are less exposed to vested interests of the old economy. So that's, I think, another explanation why we feel that cities are a bit more progressive and more proactive. So to conclude a little bit the Superman analogy, cities clearly have the power and the will to change it. They're definitely relevant, and without cities we can't really solve the climate change problem. However, a big stumbling block for cities is the lack of finance. We calculate that about 1.1 trillion in finance is missing every year for sustainable infrastructure, meaning low carbon and resilient infrastructure. And if we look at the climate finance that is available today, things like the Green Climate Fund, all the programs of MDBs, only a fraction of this money, only about 15% is going to cities. And if you look at the relevance of cities, it should be actually much more. And on top of that, we all know that the 100 billion by the GCF is still a drop in the ocean, right? So even if we would get 70% of climate finance going to cities, that would still be far away from the 1.1 trillion that we need every year. And the main barriers we observed at city level are lack of creditworthiness. So that's an issue that the World Bank has been working on for quite a long time. So cities often have difficult access to capital markets because investors don't consider them creditworthy. Sometimes cities are even not allowed to access capital markets, and there are laws or regulation in place that say cities can only receive money from the national government. So sometimes cities really don't have that much flexibility. There is a lack of capacity and know-how in cities when it comes to climate change or climate finance, particularly in developing countries. There is the typical lack of bankable projects that we see everywhere, but this is a very acute problem in the context of cities. And overall, we sense a lack of innovation. So when it comes to financial innovation, we see that, there is a very little innovation happening in this space. And the focus of the City Finance Lab, which South Pole, together with Climate Kick and these other partners that you see here, including CDP, FMDV, which is a French organization focusing on climate finance in cities, and Global Infrastructure Basel. We launched the City Finance Lab a few months ago, and the focus of the lab is to create new financial instruments and mechanisms to unlock climate finance for cities. And there are other similar labs already out there. There is, for example, the Global Innovation Lab for climate finance, but these are typically initiatives geared towards the energy sector, and so far there is no single similar lab that is tailored to the needs of cities and that aims to develop financial mechanisms and instruments specifically for cities. So that's what's new about the initiative. The concept of the lab itself is not new, it has been tested and quite successful. So the Global Innovation Lab by CPI, they managed to unlock already $1 billion in finance by developing new financial instruments and making them attractive for MDBs, private banks, asset managers, and so on. And our ambition with this lab would be to unlock about $500 million over the next 5 years. And how does it work? The process is very simple. It's basically just a call for ideas. So we will launch it on June 4th, and the call will be open until July 20th. And then cities, project developers, financial institutions, they can submit ideas about innovative financial mechanisms or instruments. Then the Secretariat, and we expect that we will get about 50 submissions. Then the Secretariat will assess them and bring them down to the best 10. And then this will be done with an expert committee. And then the best 3 or 4 ideas will get support from the lab to further develop the ideas. So that the lab will provide support mainly in the form of technical support to further develop the idea, but also access to MDBs, IFIs, financial intermediaries, banks, and so on that are interested to get involved in the financial space. So what we are doing at the lab level is to secure commitment from MDBs, private banks that would like to get exposure to these ideas, and then pick them up, pick the ones that they like up from the best ideas, and then try to implement or provide funding to scale these ideas up. So that's in a nutshell how the lab works. And what the Climate Kick would contribute to the whole story is it will help us to disseminate the knowledge about the lab, try to replicate it in other cities. The Climate Kick is doing a lot of other activities that are complementary to the lab. For example, a lot around capacity building for cities, online training modules, things like that. So the Climate Kick's, let's say, portfolio of programs and activities would be used on side by side with the lab. And in terms of examples of instruments or mechanisms that could come out of the lab, one idea would be green bonds or social impact bonds and tailor them to cities. We could think of guarantee instruments for cities that de-risk investment by the financial sector. We could think about the concept of private-public partnerships and how to unlock money through such concepts, revolving funds. Since we have here also a lot of people that come from carbon markets, there are already some ideas moving around about the concept of results-based finance for cities. So mimic the concept of carbon markets to unlock payments against results in cities. And another just idea that could come up would be crowdfunding, for example, leveraging contribution from citizens to finance initiatives or action in their own city. Who can apply for the call? As I said, the call is launching on June 4th. Anyone, like a city itself, a project developer, a financial player, this would be the most obvious candidates, but there are no hard criteria on who can apply and who cannot. And then in terms of implementation partners running the lab, we have South Pole running the secretariat at the moment, side by side with the Climate Kick. So these would be the main partners for now. But then we have CDP, FMDV, and Global Infrastructure Basel, who are all very active in infrastructure finance, providing expertise during the calls. And also important to mention, tomorrow, Friday, at 2:30 p.m., there will be a webinar with more information about the lab. So if you would like to learn more, you can go into our website. You'll see there a press release about the City Finance Lab and some information about this webinar. And we have also some leaflets on the benches and also at the South Pole booth. If you're interested, just pick one. Or feel free to talk to me or Skylar after the pitch. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Patrick, for joining. Would you prefer to sit or stand?
I'll stay here.
You'll stay there, okay. We promised a dynamic pitch hub, so we're making dynamic changes on the fly. This is really interesting. I think it's a very prescient topic. You pointed it out very early on. 3/4 of the world's population by 2050 will be centered in cities. Municipalities and local governments do a lot of the stuff that we see every day in the places where we live, eat, and play. And they're going to be critical for this. So I think, thank you for your contributions to the space, and it sounds really promising, the call for proposals and what comes out of it. I have some questions, but I think I'd just like to start off by seeing if anyone in the audience has anything that they want to ask or contribute. I was going to say, they have a call for proposals coming up. You have some time to think about it, but in case you have anything right now, here's your chance.
Hello, my name is Martin Barth. I'm a co-founder of Ecoligo, a startup, and my question would be if we apply to this contest, and then you'd actually get selected. What would be the benefits? Would it be just receiving advice and contributions to implement the idea from an idea to actually an implemented solution? Or would it be also that we receive some monetary contributions to actually implement it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So right now, what we can offer with the funding that is available, and that's seed funding mainly from the Climate Kick, would be, it's an accelerator type of concept. You get ideas, and then you provide a lot of technical support by really experts in the field that will help you to make the business case for your idea more attractive. That's, I think, one benefit. And then the other benefit that we hope will also unlock finance to implement would be access to financial players that are interested to get involved in the city space. So we are currently in discussions with MDBs, IFIs, private banks that we know have committed to do sustainable investments, are very interested in the city space, and they will act as an observer around the lab, get access to the ideas. And if we look at how the Global Innovation Lab for Finance is working by CPI, that worked there very well. So the MDBs ended up, or private banks ended up picking some of the ideas that emerged out of the lab and implemented them. So an idea that was just an idea ended up unlocking hundreds of millions of dollars. There is, for example, a guarantee mechanism around energy efficiency by the IEDB came out of the lab, just as one example, right? But that's just the beginning. We are also reaching out to additional funders that could maybe over time provide more funding to the lab that could help us get a bit further in the kind of support that we have, so to move things towards implementation.
It's not fair, Patrick, because that answered the two questions I had written down on my sheet here. So while I think of another one, do we have any other questions from the audience? I do want to get a little bit into a little bit more detail because I don't think want to get too ahead of ourselves, right? Because the whole point of the call for proposals is to crowdsource the ideas and see what's out there and get the best and brightest, right? But you do mention some things in some really high-level generalities, like new financial instruments and public-private partnerships. And my personal response would be yes, but what? So within the range of and the scope of PPPs or new financial instruments, there could be any number of things. Do you have any inclinations about what you think has been successful? Or what could be successful? Or is this you're truly starting with a blank slate and let's see what's out there?
Okay. Maybe I let Skylar start on this one and I then can complement if you're okay.
Yeah, no, I think for the lab we have things, particularly in the Low Carbon City Lab and Climate Kick, that we've done in the past, for example, with green bonds, looking at different kinds of ESCOs that we know have been very successful. But I mean, part of the point of this lab is to really inspire innovation in financial mechanisms. So in that sense, we're quite agnostic as to what's proposed, as long as you can show it's a new innovative financing mechanism. And things, or looking at things in the past like green bonds, or turning it on its head and looking at it in another way would also be something very interesting for us. But I don't know if you want to give a more kind of concrete case. So.
No, I think it's actually, I gave a couple of examples in the pitch, but as you said, we don't want to give people the impression that we're tending already in one direction or another. It should be really as open as possible. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. Maybe there are financial instruments that worked really well in another sector, but have never been applied to the context of cities. Think of, like, for example, and that's a tricky example, difficult to implement. I know the World Bank has tried it in the past, but the concept of results-based finance for cities, for example. It's tricky, it's not easy, but it's something that worked really well in carbon markets. And we see cities interested in that concept, also leveraging private sector involvement around the city to actually, when they offset in a project that happens within the boundaries of a city. So there are some ideas out there, but they were never really successful or applied to the city context yet. So this could also, you don't need to reinvent the world. Maybe there are quite obvious cases out there that are just about tweaking.
I think that's a really good point to make, and that's one that was kind of in the back of my mind as I asked that question is, there are some things that we know have worked, but maybe not at the right scale, or you didn't get the lessons learned in front of the right people, things like landfill gas capture and use for electricity generation or bus rapid transport. And I think that's what's encouraging about the Climate Kick and South Pole partnership is because you bring the expertise and the results-based finance and a whole other areas as well, and then the wealth of knowledge and the community and partnerships that Climate Kick brings. And I think that that's a really strong partnership along with the rest of your group that can help see not only the new stuff, but how can we reapply the old stuff and put the right people in the room to see what happens. So what would success look like to you in the next 3 years? Because I think you have a short-term call for proposals, and then even longer term, do you have a longer-term time horizon? And then what would success look like for you then? What's next if this works?
So I think to start out, we're in really the first phase of the lab, which is the phase between South Pole and Climate Kick. We are looking in the future for additional funders because I think it's worth pointing out with these proposals that with our funding as Climate Kick, we're looking at really European-based initiatives, but obviously we know that the city's needs are happening in emerging countries and that we need to expand this. So I think that would be one criteria of success for the future. Patrick mentioned that in the next 5 years, we want to leverage $500,000 worth of additional finance, so that's definitely a goal that we're looking to reach as we continue to scale. I don't know if you have anything you want to add?
No, I think, success will be ultimately, do we identify innovations that are actually deployed in the market and leverage finance? So the ambition is actually 500 million. And we feel it's realistic because the Global Innovation Lab for Finance, they just managed to get to $1 billion within a similar time horizon. I think the lab is running now also for about 5 years. So we feel it's realistic, it's doable. And if we get to that, that would be, I think, the biggest indicator of success. Yeah.
I always like to jump from A to Z, so thanks for bringing me down to earth. I think that you guys have certainly a lot of ambition here, but it's worthwhile, and I think you have the right people in the room to help push this forward and make it successful. We're just about out of time. Do you have any concluding remarks, or do we have any other questions from the audience? Anything to add, Patrick or Skylar?
Attend our webinar tomorrow at 2 o'clock and submit your proposals on the 4th.
I think that's the big thing. Put the ideas out there. Let's see what we can move, and it all started here with South Pole and Climate Kick at Innovate4Climate. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much.
Skylar.
Thank you.